Welcome back to Conscious Caregiving with L&L. I am your co-host, Lance A. Slatton, also the host of All Home Care Matters. As always, joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Lori La Bey. Welcome, Lori.
Well, hello, Lance. I'm excited to have this conversation and learn more about your venture here. And it sounds like it was a fun time, and we're going to learn a lot about the future of caregiving.
Yes, we, for viewers and listeners who may not be familiar, we were invited to attend the 10th annual National Elizabeth Dole Convening in D.C. last month, and it took some strategy and coordination on our end because we had to take our camera crew, and we made it work, and it was a great experience. I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Wonderful. Well, should we dive in and get started?
Sounds good.
Okay. So first of all, I always ask people what inspired them to attend. We get a lot of invitations to do a lot of different things. Some of it is timing, some of it just perks our interests in things. What made you kind of step in and step up and attend?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Timing is a lot of things of interest. And, we know a lot of these events are really promoting wonderful resources and support for family caregivers and their loved ones. And you really got to pick and choose what is going to work best, with your responsibilities on the other end of that. And so in April, we had gotten an email from the Elizabeth Dole Foundation wanting to talk about, potentially having one of their executives on the show to discuss their convening ahead of time to help promote it and, kind of let people have an idea what it's going to be about. And further on in the email, they had invited us to attend. And so we wanted to clarify, is this just attending as a guest? Is this attending to cover it? What is your invitation entail? And, we had a meeting with them and they said, no, you can come cover it, film, interview people. And I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity because the Elizabeth Dole Foundation has done such tremendous work. Last year, they had the passage of the Dole Act, which really provides resources for caregivers and their loved ones. And so we had to coordinate on our end, and we made the decision that this is something we wanted to go and help promote and be a part of. And so we made our plans, and off we headed to D.C.
Well, that's fun. One of the things that our listeners may be wondering is, you referred to convening. What really is that? What does that mean? Because it's not a term that we hear really often.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a difference somewhere. To me, it's a fancier way of saying conference. But I will say the way the event was structured, maybe that's the difference. In the foyer lobby area of the Ronald Reagan building where the convening was held at, they had 30 plus government vendors there. They weren't selling things, but they were promoting the resources that they offer. Like one gentleman we spoke to, he was the executive director of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs Caregiver Support Program, where they help families get in touch and connect with resources to help with care for their loved ones. They had the Wounded Warriors were there. They had a canine project where they provide canines for families who may need one for medical reasons. Just limitless resources. They had free back massages for family caregivers. They had different programs for respite. Just really everything you could think of all in one location. But, talking with the foundation recently for our post-convening interview with them, I brought up that I thought that was one of the very remarkable aspects of this event. And they found it very successful, too, because, Lori, you may need a canine to help with a loved one for a medical reason, but then you might also want some respite for yourself. Well, the group you're getting the canine provided by, they may not, and I'm sure they don't, provide respite for the family, but then a table over here you have the caregiver support program where they can provide you with respite. So all of these resources who may even not know about each other also had a chance to connect. And, we always talk here on the show a lot about everybody staying in their own silos. Well, now, the silos were gone and everybody's all in the same area. So now they're able to refer other resources to people they may be serving. And that may not have been possible before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, like in a lot of conferences, they'll have the big room out to the
Yeah.
side and things, and you have to kind of go through all of those things. Were most of these or all of these government agency?
A majority, but not all.
Okay.
They had one group there that had virtual reality goggles, and that's to help reduce PTSD. It's helped to soothe people, calm their anxieties, lower stress levels. It's like a quick action recovery resource. So they did have other resources that weren't just government specific, but a majority of them were government.
Okay, okay. Well, it sounds like they really get the aspect of the stress, and the need for the respite and support, which is critical. I mean, we all know that if you're, no matter what it is you're dealing with, but especially for our military men and women, I just don't think people understand what they go through, and just being apart from their families alone can be, just devastating in and of itself. For you, when you decided to go, what was your main objective?
My main objective was to learn how we can provide more resources to our audiences. And, because I will admit, there are probably many resources and programs out there that I'm not aware of, because there's, thousands, if not more than that. And, I really wanted to learn too, what is the newest research talking about? What are the new programs? What are the new initiatives that they're hoping to propel into the future? A good friend of both of ours, Malika Moore, I had reached out to her when we made the decision that we are going to go and attend, and she lives in the D.C. area. And she has, Aging and Amazing, her client care program, case management program. And I said, you and your staff should go. There's no fee to attend. Go online, register. I said, when you're there, we'll meet up and, I'll interview you for part of our coverage. And, when we interviewed her and some of her staff, they had breakout sessions during the day. So we can get to this later, but they had a lot of, keynote speakers, and then they would have these mini breakout sessions other places, like in rooms throughout the Ronald Reagan building. And the one that really fascinated me personally the most, because I didn't attend those because we were covering it, when talking to one of Malika's employees, was micro jobs for caregivers. We're here at the 10th annual Elizabeth Dole Foundation convening. I am joined by Malika and Kate. Malika, as some of you may know, is a good friend of the show. Is also a board member here at All Home Care Matters. Welcome, Malika.
Hi.
Welcome, Kate.
Thanks for letting me speak today.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to ask you guys briefly, you just came from one of the breakout sessions here at the convening. What was your breakout session about?
Mine was about building the ecosystems around veterans and families, and how to make it inclusive for caregivers, and what are the gaps and what can we do to improve things.
Okay, great. Kate, did you go to a breakout session?
I did, and mine was about growing economic mobility for caregivers and how we create ecosystems that support caregivers who can potentially join the workforce at one point, or expanding eligibility requirements so that benefits also extend to caregivers after their caregiving journey ends.
And that's great, because a lot of times we don't think about what happens when the caregiving does end, because so many family caregivers sacrifice their careers, their jobs, some even relationships.
Right.
So what did you guys learn about some ideas or ways that caregivers can be supported once the caregiving ends?
I think one of the biggest things that we talked about that was most interesting to me was the idea of micro jobs. So even when you are in the middle of your caregiving journey, you have opportunities to enter into the workforce, but in a way that's not traditional. So micro job or micro grants, entrepreneurial grants for caregivers, because we know that caregivers are some of the most innovative people that exist in our country today, and they have to be innovative because their job as a caregiver demands it. So kind of how do we create an ecosystem that encourages caregivers to share their great ideas, and how do we also encourage entrepreneurship within caregiver communities?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's absolutely needed and definitely necessary. You know, Malika, you're the owner of Aging and Amazing.
Damn.
First, where would you like people to go to learn more about Aging and Amazing?
Oh, well, you can go to our website. It's agingamazing.com and learn more about care management. So that's where you can go to find out more about our company.
Yeah. And so, you know, you guys have been here at the Convening since early this morning.
Yes.
What's some of the takeaways that has really impressed you or that's inspired you?
I think, you know, it's been just doing our work as care managers. I think it just emphasized the need for care managers, more care managers, and like Kate emphasized, this untapped workforce of caregivers who have all these resources and skills and innovation that they can help others to navigate the journey, because it's not a if, it's when we'll be caregivers. So really being able to kind of capitalize on their skill set, and also realizing how big and integral care managers are, and just being that link to services, advocacy, support in this system, and supporting caregivers and veterans.
Fantastic. Well, Kate, Malika, thank you ladies so much, and we appreciate your time.
You know, being a family caregiver for my father in my early 20s, I was making essentially minimum wage at the university. I was very thankful for it, but it wasn't really enough to support a family or, you know, to have your own place to live. But the convenience of fitting it around your class schedule was wonderful. But a lot of family caregivers who aren't in college or don't have that flexibility, they may not be able to leave the home, or maybe they can, but just very minimally. The whole breakout session was all the new trends and, you know, resources available to earn an income while still being a family caregiver, which I think is invaluable to family caregivers because, yeah, they're a family caregiver. They're most likely unpaid, and they probably have other bills and responsibilities financially that they have to take care of.
Yeah, that's a really important factor, and you hear that from people all the time. They have to leave their jobs, or you know, they start out that, you know, their boss is going to let them cut back in hours, and then pretty soon this isn't going to work. And some places will do job share and stuff, but again, everything's changed, especially since COVID. And you know, with working out of the house, I think that's helped a lot probably in developing some of these micro jobs. But now you're hearing the call back to the office, you know, get back in there and stuff too. So it's you know, it's just such a fluid state in terms of what's available, and is it going to be a match? Because when you're caregiving, you can't always say I'm going to put in these hours,
Right.
you know, because you might not be able to do that. And nowadays a lot of employers, you know, they're tracking when you're on your computer and what you're doing, you know, every second. And I know they have workarounds with like cheater mouse movement things and stuff, even with that. But, you know, it's, you really need the compassion behind
Absolutely.
this, and the understanding of the needs that can work for both sides. Because I think the people who step into those jobs also want to do a good job. They want to give back because they appreciate the flexibility and the compassion and the understanding coming from the employer.
100%. And, you know, that was another thing discussed is, you know, family caregivers that have jobs, employers understanding, you know, we have maternity leave, we have, you know, FMLA, but FMLA saves your job, but it doesn't result in any income while you're, you know, on FMLA, and trying to get employers to understand the critical role that family caregivers play, not only in their home taking care of their loved one, but also in an economic sense and in the job force, you know, find ways to help accommodate these family caregivers so that they can still be contributing, earning an income, but also maintaining their responsibilities as a family caregiver.
Well, especially when you've got an employee who's been with you they know the systems inside and out versus having to, interview and train and put all that money. I mean, it's going to take a while to get them up and running. And the way the job market is, they might ghost you at the end, or they might ghost you when training starts, and then you have this gap. So I think it's, I just look at, I was talking with somebody the other day who's has family over in Australia, and they're like, oh my gosh, they get so much time off, but they understand the mental health, and they have holidays way more than we do. And their holidays are really kind of for that life balance piece. They understand that. And I don't think we grasp that here in the United States as well as we could. But I have so many other questions, so let's move on. But I'm glad you brought up the micro jobs. That's wonderful. I'm always interested in comparing, conference experience or convening experiences, because they are very different, from energy level to what's provided, and if you feel you're valued or respected in the process. Is it engaging? Was it worth your time? So how would you tally it up?
So, going there, we knew we had a couple of scheduled interviews with the new 2025 Dole Fellows class, which is very inspirational. And, I can talk to, a little bit more to that later. But I wasn't sure what else to expect. Admittedly, this was our first out-of-state, on-site conference we went to, as far as like in a media presence or capacity. So I was just excited about that to begin with. And as I shared with you, I was able to rope my wife and kids into going along as well. So we got a couple extra days in D.C. And, when we got to the Ronald Reagan building, you have to go through layers of security, because plus, and on top of that, we have all this camera equipment and these, hard shell cases and different things. And we went down, and immediately they knew who we were, gave us our press passes. And then the event started about a half hour, 45 minutes later. And it started with the Secretary of the VA, Doug Collins. And I want to stress this to people too, because when you say DC and you start dropping in cabinet officials and politicians, both sides start thinking, oh, is it the left side? Is it the right side? No, it was 100% nonpartisan. And that's what I found very, very refreshing about the event. Secretary Collins was talking about, a child that he has that was born with spina bifida. And, one thing that probably rises above all else, Lori, for me, was his example just really visually and emotionally hit home. I have healthy children, but I can only imagine what a parent goes through that doesn't. And he said, one time he was at one of the fast food restaurants, and he was stopping in really quickly to get something to eat because he had to go to a meeting or what have you. And the deep fryer for the French fries went off. And the alarm sound that it triggers when they're done, that beep, 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 he said it was almost like he went into fight or flight mode. And he panicked because he said, that's the same noise my daughter's machine makes at home. He says, all of a sudden, I left and I went straight home because it had that cause and effect on him. And I feel like, people that go through that family caregiving experience and they have situations like that, you're never not a family caregiver just because you left the house. And so he's coming to this from a very personal perspective, but so did the other politicians that spoke that day. They all have a story. And so for me, it was just very refreshing to see, this industry that you and I are so passionate about intersecting with the highest levels of government and just uniting for this common good to support these caregivers. I was beyond impressed with it, but I was also very honored for the experience too, because we got to speak to these politicians, we got to speak to these family caregivers, and we're playing a very small part of elevating the awareness for what these caregivers and families go through.
Well, that's huge, because again, I agree with you. I do that a lot of times when I see politicians or when I see researchers. I just think it's going to be wah, 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 and it's going to be black and white, and it's going to be, their policy, their research, very focused, and not, so many of them don't know how to speak to a crowd that doesn't, that's not in that loop of policy making or research. And so they lose the crowd. And I think storytelling is so powerful. I think it humanizes us. There's no escaping it. We're all caregivers at some level in our life. And pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, all levels of our life, it just changes. And I don't care if you have kids or parents, you still have friends and coworkers and neighbors and pets and all of those things, that we give care to. And a lot of times we don't even realize, how we're coming off, how that's affecting us. So often we're kind of trained to hide that, to be in control and stay on topic. And yet when we veer off and be our authentic selves and aren't embarrassed or ashamed by that, there's kind of a sigh of relief, I think, that comes over the audience, that goes, this is nice.
Yeah.
100%. Because they can still bring that other level in. They can bring the research, they can bring the policy, but it's received at a whole different level when that story is tied in. And it just humanizes it and makes, I think, people want to listen more.
Yeah. One thing I'll just add to that, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is a nonprofit, but it's also nonpartisan. They'll gladly share. They work with any administration. They welcome people from both sides of the aisle. We had the cabinet official from the Trump administration there, but then you had Senator Gallego, who's a Democrat from Arizona there. It was all nonpartisan. They were there just to humanize the issue of caregiving. And for me, it gave me a lot of hope because there's multiple politicians there, but politics never played into this one bit whatsoever. You wouldn't even know what party they were from if you didn't see it, or look them up. But they're all uniting in a time where, politics are very fractured in this country, and everybody is steadfast to one side or the other, whoever they support. But at this event, you could leave all that outside and be there for the common good of family caregivers, and that's what I found so remarkable, that that's possible in this day and age. So it gave me great hope.
Yeah, that's neat at that level.
Right.
I think you and I and everything we do, we try to be collaborators and invite everybody in from the actual person diagnosed to someone who's a caregiver, to all different types of levels and situations that are just there and have created a movement, an organization, a service, product, or tool to help. And to me, that's the key. So I love that that the Dole Foundation is able to do that at that level, and that people are coming in respecting that and not, it sounds like, not trying to push a side agenda, because that happens a lot too. Even in other conferences, people will come in and go, yeah, no, we'll be collaborative. And then all of a sudden it just kind of gets glitchy or clicky or uncomfortable. Yeah. I guess is probably, for me, the best phrasing, how it makes me feel when it goes that angle and stuff. Well, we've done a little name dropping so far, but I want to talk a little bit more about the networking and the connections that you made there, because this was a big conference with a lot of people. What were some of your most memorable people that you met while you were in D.C.?
Yeah, well, for me personally, it was the Medal of Honor recipient, Leroy Petrie.
Welcome. Thank you for your service. Would you take a moment, introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Master Sergeant retired Leroy Petrie, Medal of Honor recipient.
Yes. Thank you, sir. And I just want to say, you just gave some inspiring words about your experience coming home and what the VA system and what it meant for family caregivers and the importance of them. What would you like to say to people about that?
I'm happy to be here and to see the leaders in the room there that are here today, and the ones that are continuously working their hardest efforts to make the best Today, our military and our VA is doing better than they ever have to take care of our injured, wounded, and ill family and service members. Proud to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you. And we want to say thank you for your service and all your dedication and the work you continue to do to support the VA, our veterans, and family caregivers.
I'm honored to be a part of the Tri-West family now, and whatever I can do to continue to support my brothers and sisters and the future ones who continue to serve us in this nation, I will give my best effort.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.
He came out and spoke shortly after the opening of the convening, and you could have heard a pin drop when he was talking, but when they announced him and welcomed him, and it wasn't really promoted on the literature that I had, so wasn't aware he was going to be there. There's only, I think, 64 living Medal of Honor recipients. My family is a big military family. My father, the Marines, my uncles, my father-in-law, Navy, and so I have just a very strong admiration and respect for the uniform and their service. And he was talking about when he came home. So what happened with him was they were in Afghanistan. He had gotten shot through both of his legs, and then his troops were kind of pinned down, and a grenade came over a wall. And without even hesitation or without really thinking, he grabbed it and went to throw it back over. Otherwise, his troops could have been, severely injured or worse. He unfortunately lost his right hand from the ulna down. And, just hearing how he had to relearn how to wash himself, how to feed himself, all the things he experienced, his family then became a family caregiver. And so he has a very strong passion and, admiration for what family caregivers go through firsthand. And so, when he was done speaking, we went out and, first and foremost, thanked him for his service and asked if he would mind, sharing a few words. And, he was very gracious. And for me, that's just one of the highest honors, was to be able to shake his hand and thank him for his ultimate sacrifice. And he still serves to this day, not in active combat role, but helping support families who have wounded loved ones that return home from service and or stateside, and so here's somebody that could just step away and, go about his life, do what he wants. And, he's still serving and trying to support family caregivers.
Well, and I think too, what's interesting with that, and I think this would be a good example, though I don't know for sure, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in his storytelling, it really brings to light in a very evident fashion of what the person who you're caring for is going through or has gone through. And I think so often that, I don't want to say is overlooked, but it's not understood. I think caregivers can sometimes get in the mode, I'm doing everything for you, and they're frustrated and they're tired and things, but it's like, well, you don't think the other person's frustrated and tired with this situation too? Even, with somebody with dementia, they still have all those feelings. Anyone who's lost some cognitive abilities, but, you have so many different types of situations where we're caring. It's a struggle on both sides. And I think we need to understand that and respect that. And then I found for myself, and I don't know about you, but that took some of the feeling of it being a burden off, because it was like, I'm going through nothing compared to them.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I know, the families we help, we'll talk. It's not uncommon to talk to family members who either are still playing a family caregiver role, even though we're there, or, they'll share those exact, feelings. And, it's easy for convenience and speed, just do it and say, here it is, instead of, then taking that extra step. How are you feeling today? Not on a superficial level, but in a meaningful way. Like, if I ask you, I really want you to share. Don't just say good, thank you, and then I move on. And don't lose, perspective of what that person you're caring for is going through, which I think, being human, I think it's very easy for all of us to just kind of move on and think we did our part, so now we can do our next thing we're, being asked to do, and just spend that extra few moments with that person, because I know they don't want to feel like a burden, right? Why, to me, that's adding insult to injury. If you're making them feel like, they're bothersome, or they're, an irritant, or they're causing you grief, or, don't throw in their face you had to miss work this week because of them. They can't control it. They can't help it. And I think for all of us, our loved ones, the last thing they want to do is rely on us to take care of them. And so try to keep that in perspective and not lose sight of how lucky we are not to be in that situation, but that they didn't ask to be in that situation, and it's most likely not their fault. The diagnosis of dementia, they probably didn't do something necessarily to cause them to develop it, and so they're doing the best they can, and we should try to make their lives as peaceful and comfortable as possible, because like you said, they've already lost so much. Let's not cause them to lose any more.
Yeah. Well, and with our military, finally mental health is kind of coming up with what they've gone through with the situations. But in all caregiving situations, I think we need to talk about mental health more, because we have gotten in life, and this is my personal opinion, we have gotten so structured and so task oriented. I mean, a lot of our kids don't even know how to talk. They're just thumbing it, texting, or playing a video game with their earbuds in to people they don't really even know or have never met. And we've lost abilities of how to communicate and how to read, nonverbal communications, because we have to slow down to be able to take that stuff in. And to me, all of that is really important as well. When you were out there, did you establish some new partnerships or collaborations?
Well, not a partnership in the sense of the word partnership, but definitely some great connections. I want to be real quick, Lori, if I could. I just want to mention something, because you brought up the mental health. The working groups that they had there was 4 really powerful ones. The first one was strengthening emotional and mental well-being. So that goes exactly to what you're saying about focusing on that mental health. The growing and sustaining economic mobility that I alluded to earlier. Improving support and outcomes for caregiving youth and families, and then fostering supportive care ecosystems for caregivers and their veterans. So they're really trying to address those issues that don't often get addressed. So I just wanted to add that in there. But yeah, we made some great connections. One of them is she is the executive managing director of Federal Health Maximus. Her name is Monica Rosser. We actually met her at the after Convening gala, and she'll be coming on the show later this month. And several other people that we've gotten kind of connected with that I feel like the more the better, right? It takes a village to really raise these issues and help support these family caregivers. A couple of the veterans that we met, just connecting to them. But one specifically that I'd like to mention, if we have a moment, her name was Leanna Redshaw, and she's a 2025 Dole Fellow, just newly minted, and she was one of the scheduled interviews that we had, and she was a substitute for the person we were supposed to interview, because that person, being a family caregiver, had an issue come up with their loved one and wasn't able to make it, and so she was a substitute. So we knew very little about her, but it was very evident very quickly that she has just a real difficult situation. Her husband was doing training stateside for, I think, natural disaster or terrorism, something like that. And part of the drills they were doing were, jumping from helicopters. Mm-hmm. And when he went to jump, he had hit his head so forcibly that he developed a TBI. It did not get addressed immediately. Kind of like my father's mentality. We're tough. We're going to work through it. I don't know if that was their reason, but I can imagine it was. And things weren't getting better. Things were getting worse. And so they went to a doctor, got diagnosed with the TBI. But then that impact and that injury led to the development of early onset Alzheimer's. 35-year-old veteran, wife is 35 maybe. They had a 10-month-old child at home and other children, and now he requires continuous care. And it's just, as I'm speaking with her and, I'm hearing this very firsthand for the first time, she started getting very emotional. And
We're here at the 10th annual Elizabeth Dole Foundation's convening. I am joined by Liana Redshaw, who is a 2025 Elizabeth Dole Foundation Fellow. Welcome, Liana.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. I want to first start off, if you'd mind sharing a little bit about your backstory and how you became a family caregiver.
Yeah, so my husband and I have been married for 10 years as of this April. And prior to all of this happening, I worked in marketing, and I was pregnant with our third baby. I was, I think, around 4 months pregnant, and my husband Ryan went for a AT training, drill, and hurricane duty, so they were packed together. While he was there, he hit his head on the way out of a helicopter. He didn't report it at the time, but by the time he came home to me 3 months later, he could no longer go from one room to another, knowing where he was going. He couldn't change our youngest son at the time's diaper anymore. He couldn't make a baby bottle. So this sent me down a very long, windy road, ultimately discovering that my husband unfortunately had a genetic mutation, PSEN1, and was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's aggravated by the TBI. So that's kind of led me to where I am now.
When you first got the diagnosis, I'm imagining it's just shocking.
Yes.
Not to make light of it, there's a saying that a lot of people use, and it's when you've seen one person with dementia, you've seen one person.
Yes.
And that's what makes it so hard and difficult. But here, you guys are in your early 30s,
Early 30s, yeah.
Young children at home. What was the first thing that went through your mind as his wife?
What am I going to do? I mean, I was pregnant with Tallulah, my youngest, and that kind of set off a very complicated pregnancy. She ended up having fetal growth restriction because I was so stressed. We were going to 2 appointments a week, one for me and one for him. So there was a lot going on at that time, and yeah.
Yeah. When you became this caregiver now, what kind of resources did you find in the onset? We always say you don't know what you don't know. You don't
Yes.
know what you don't need to know. Most people don't prepare or plan to be a caregiver. You plan and prepare to be a parent.
Yes.
What was those first weeks, days, months like for you?
So a lot of it was a battle to get the diagnosis because a lot of people, I mean, he looked fine.
Right.
So completely invisible diagnosis. But, quickly, things started to fall apart. And one of the first organizations that stepped in was Wounded Warrior Project.
Okay.
And they have been instrumental in helping my family navigate forward. They have covered adult daycare for him. They've covered a life skills person, his music therapy. I've also received help from Semperfi. They helped me move across the country, helped me get into the home I'm in now. And also I did receive a good amount of support from his unit. The men from his unit came out, they packed up my house, they loaded up the trucks, they helped me in a lot of ways. Also emotionally, I still call a lot of them for support. So I had a good deal of help, and there's also been a good deal of challenge.
I'm sure. When you're going through those, first weeks, months, when did you eventually discover the Elizabeth Dole Foundation?
So pretty far into it, actually. I went through all kinds of different resources and digging. Unfortunately, there's not a lot out there for early onset Alzheimer's. But I did eventually discover a town hall meeting for Elizabeth Dole, and I attended that virtually. And when I attended that, I was kind of like, oh, wow, this looks like this could be helpful.
Right.
And kind of started going down that path. And then eventually I got an email about applying to be a fellow,
Wow.
and that's what I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
tremendous. When your husband received that diagnosis and, being in his early 30s,
Yes.
did it add an additional level of complexity for you as a family, having to explain to peers, my husband has
an
Alzheimer's?
incredible amount of complexity.
What would you want people to know about that? Because, there's people in their 70s, 60s, 80s, and family members get a diagnosis, and then other family members might not acknowledge it because mom looks fine, grandma looks fine, and here's somebody, a healthy,
seemingly.
military personnel that's fit as can be, now has this diagnosis. I'm sure that had to be very difficult on top of the other things you're dealing with.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of misconceptions about Alzheimer's and dementia, namely being that it's not just a memory issue. A lot of it started out being a reaction, a speed reaction issue. So we'd all stop and he'd keep walking because his body wasn't communicating, oh, I need to stop. So I would have to put my hand out so he wouldn't walk into oncoming traffic, which almost happened many times. In addition to that, it's a judgment and perception issue. So unfortunately, my husband is now late stage 6, and he needs 24/7 supervision. He can't be alone with his children. He, can't go outside by himself. He can't cook meals. He can't he needs to be reminded to eat and drink. He needs prompting for all of those things. It's so many people say, oh, does he still remember who you are? Which is such an offensive thing to say to somebody who has a loved one struggling with Alzheimer's. And luckily enough, right now he does still know who me and my children are. But I have watched him holding our baby and forget that he's holding her.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me asking, having children adds another layer of complexity to it. As a parent, and for people watching or listening to this, is there any wisdom or advice you could give to them if they may experience something similar, how to approach that with the children?
Yeah, so, I really try to meet my kids where they're at. I think one of the biggest ways our family has, and I have been affected, is how it's affected my motherhood. I always wanted to be a mom. It's, my biggest accomplishment in life. And trying to guide the children through this, knowing, their dad isn't who he was, but for them, they don't know that. So just being around him still is worth it.
Yeah, I have 3 young children. They came with us here to D.C. They're having a great time. But, I always, when you have that fatherhood, motherhood, it does add a layer that is always being navigated step by step. And then to add that component into it, their dad is a strong military person. And, and having to watch that, I'm sure, is just got to be one of the worst forms of parenting you ever imagined you'd have to go through.
Yes.
Do you have recommendations if children ask questions? And I'm sure it's personal for each family, but do you think it's good to let them know up front? What would you recommend?
In my experience, I've been truthful with my children. I have responded, again, age appropriately, but literally just 2 days before I arrived here, my 8-year-old asked me, is Daddy dying? On the way home from school. Just a routine carpool ride home, and that question is coming up. So, with each of them, you parent your children differently, right? So my responses vary, but I have found that being truthful is the best way forward, and just reminding them that, I love them very much and their daddy loves them very much, and there's nothing that they did.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great advice. With, with you guys relocating now so you have more support, what kind of support has the Elizabeth Dole Foundation been for you and your family?
Yeah, so, one of the biggest things truly it has been becoming a fellow and meeting other people like me. And also, when I first applied, so provide some clarity here, my husband doesn't live with us anymore. When we moved to Illinois, I had to make a very hard decision that it wasn't safe. It wasn't safe for the kids. So I placed him in an apartment. It's about 10 minutes from my house, and I have rotating caregivers 24/7. So in that, I had gone to them, and when I applied for this, I said, I don't know if I really qualify because he doesn't live with me. And yes, I manage all of his care, and he's with me on the weekends. But, I don't know if I really qualify. And they stopped me very quickly and said, you absolutely do qualify. And for me, that was huge because I've carried so much guilt. For not keeping him in the house with us, even though logically I knew it was not safe. Doors were being left open, stoves were being left on. I've got a 20-month-old at home. Like, it's just not safe, right, for somebody with dementia. But them giving me that acknowledgement has really helped me. Move forward. In addition to, the emotional support, they're also helping me navigate. My husband still is not service connected. I'm still not receiving any benefits from the VA. So as we speak right now, there's lots of people pushing to make these connections happen for me and to make sure we do get service connected. Additionally, we are at the point where he needs memory care placement. The apartment and having him with caregivers has worked great, but unfortunately he has progressed and is now requiring more assistance beyond what we can do in home. So the Elizabeth Dole Foundation alongside Wounded Warrior Project is helping me to navigate that next step.
Wonderful. When we help families as well, and a lot of times we recommend, there's aid and attendance and there's these different benefits, but, aid and attendance, not everybody qualifies for. Were you able to find, is that the resources you're speaking about? Was that through Wounded Warrior?
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet because we don't have a VA rating. So I'm hoping that is the direction if they ultimately service connect as they should, that we will qualify for that.
Absolutely. So, Leanna, one more question before we go, and thank you for your time, and again, thank you to you and your husband's service and sacrifice. When you run into a new caregiver, what is your number one recommendation for them as they navigate this journey?
Trust your intuition. Ask a lot of questions, and don't take no for an answer.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
These are the stories of what these people go through, though, and that's why I think, at least for us, and I'm sure for you, Lori, why we do this show and you do Alzheimer Speaks and Dementia Map, it's because we're trying to give a voice to the voiceless. We're trying to raise awareness to these issues, because had she not been a Dole Fellow and had we not gone there, nobody would know what this family is going through, right? And so it's just, these are the day-to-day issues, though, that millions of families are facing across the country. And that's why, for me, it's so important in the work that the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is doing to try to support and equip these family caregivers, but also get more buy-in from, like you said, the higher ups, the people making decisions in this country, to let them see firsthand what family caregivers are going through.
So I have two questions. I appreciate that story. And, it's sad because that's a perfect example of a donut hole family, in terms of what they've gone through, where it's kind of a rare situation compared to many, and people don't understand. So one of the things that people might not understand who are listening is, what is a TBI? I know what it is, but we use our jargon and we always think everybody knows it, but a lot of people don't. So
so a TBI is traumatic brain injury, and that's what he sustained from the force of hitting the bar or whatever he had hit on the helicopter on the way out, and that led to an injury in his brain. And that injury, and I could be wrong on the details, but it was my understanding, at least from memory, that it triggered a genetic mutation in the brain, which then led to the basically the activation, if you will, of the early onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah, which is really quite common. And so, we see, that's why we were hearing about sports, from hockey and soccer and football, and all of those injuries might not show up right away. In his case, maybe it showed up faster, but I mean, just because of the severity of it. The other thing I wanted you to kind of define, because you mentioned a Dole Fellow, and a lot of times when we hear fellow, we kind of attach that to a college situation and stuff. So is a Dole Fellow a caregiver, or what is a Dole Fellow?
It's a remarkable program that the Elizabeth Dole Foundation instituted. Now, this was their 10th annual national convening, but the Elizabeth Dole Foundation has been around for, I think, 16, 17 years. And their Dole Fellows are family caregivers of a veteran. They don't have to be a wife or a husband. In fact, this year they had a daughter become a Dole Fellow whose mother was a Dole Fellow previously. And they, I don't know all the exact specifics, and hopefully maybe we can put it up on the screen, the exact details of what it is, but I can give you the general idea. And what they do, they go through like training and, preparation. After the convening, they had the Dole Fellow Week on Capitol Hill, where the Dole Fellows would go meet their congressperson at the Capitol. They would meet their senator, their elected officials, and they're advocating for why family caregivers need support and why caregiving is a vital part of this country. And like the lady I had interviewed, the next day after she asked to take a selfie with me, that's the first time anybody's asked me to take a selfie with them other than my kids. She had put a post up on LinkedIn, and there's a picture of me and her, and then there's another picture of her and Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, because she was from Illinois. And she was advocating and talking with him about some difficulties they're running into on their claims through the VA. And the next day, Senator Durbin had a letter already sent to the VA and gave her a copy of the letter. But then they go back into their communities and do work to help support and raise awareness to family caregivers, and they try to get change implemented. It's a remarkable program, and they have a new class every year. So people that are interested can go to the Elizabeth Dole Foundation's website. We'll have that up on the screen as well, and apply to be a fellow for next cycle. And there's an application, and they put you through training, and it's a tremendous program, though. They're basically going out and trying to make a difference and advocate all throughout the country in their communities that they're from.
Okay, sounds good. So in some ways, maybe similar to what others refer to as an ambassador.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it sounds, I'm sure there's a lot of similarities there. I think that's a great way of saying it.
Yeah, and there might be additional, support or something for them through that. So, but again, you can always go to the website to find out more. It sounds like this was really a valuable experience for you, and you made some great connections, and we're given hope. And I think that's what we try to do. But it's nice when our souls get filled too, by hearing what others are doing. So that's really cool. Was there a certain part of the convening where you felt, it was just really easier or maybe set up to network with people?
I think the gala was a perfect opportunity for that. After the last speaker, which was Congresswoman Brownlee of California, 26th District, I believe, she was there to receive the Caregiver Supporter of the Year award, a beautiful crystal glass, plaque. She had some very inspirational words, and the remarkable thing about her was, she's been advocating for family caregivers and the foundation for years before it became quote unquote popular, I think, in her words. And she was a real driving pivotal force behind the passage of the Dole Act last year. Okay. And so she was recognized. We got to speak with her, and after that, then everybody moved over to the ballroom, and that was a great networking opportunity. Monica Rosser, who I had mentioned, she was introduced to us, and we were talking a lot about the importance of families having advance directives, power of attorneys, living wills, and making sure their wishes are known. And like I said, she'll be on the show later this month, and I just think just seeing all these influential people, coming together. It didn't matter their backgrounds. The one common thread was we need to support family caregivers. And a lot of these people are the people that can make that a reality. That gave me the greatest hope.
Well, I don't know, that just like fills my soul. I mean, when you feel like you're around kindred spirits that actually get it and have also stepped up to the plate to actually do something about it, because there's a lot of people that'll agree that something needs to be done and just kind of sit back. But when you see people kind of marching forward and sharing their stories and building those collaborations, and again, I'm a big believer in storytelling. I think it's one of the best ways to spread the word, because it's a trusted source. You're able to see is someone authentic or not, and that might get more difficult with AI in the future and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But I just think when we can get people out of their mind and back into their heart, we can pull more people into the cause,
Right.
as well, which is really, really cool on that. So, no, they had different sessions, for presentations and things like that. Were you able to attend any of those, or was it just too difficult with you filming?
Yeah, we did not attend them to actually listen and learn and take part, but we did go to one of them to film some of the room and different things, but then it was on to the next stop. But like I said, we talked with Malika Moore and one of her employees, and, just learning about the, micro jobs that her employee, that's the session she went to. And I believe Malika's session was all about when the caregiving ends, because so many family caregivers sacrifice literally almost everything: relationships, jobs, even their place of employment or their place of residence, all these different things, so that they can be committed and fully focused on their loved one. What happens to that family caregiver when their loved one no longer needs the care? And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about nearly as often as it should. We're trying to prepare everybody now for what to do when you're caregiving, and that's great, and that is so desperately needed. But not often are we talking about what do you do after the caregiving ends? Where do you go? What do you do? You might have been unemployed for several years or longer, so you got a resume to explain. Your skills may not be as up to date. All of these things. How do we prepare people to step into, society, so to speak, once they're no longer needed as that family caregiver? I think that's just as crucial.
Oh, it really is. In Roseville, Minnesota, with our dementia-friendly community, we developed a program actually called the Caregiver Reentry Program.
Wonderful.
And we didn't get into resume writing and things like that, but it brought people together in similar situations because their friends didn't really understand. Everyone thinks grieving, like get over it so we can get back to normal, because everyone's uncomfortable with it and has a different view of it. So you brought up some really good pieces, and I think some of that needs to be integrated as we are supporting people caring. Part of it is about the self-care. Well, this piece is part of that self-care and part of the grounding to make that transition a little bit softer landing. But it's a tough one, especially if it's been, long term. I remember, when my dad died and when my mom died, I was questioning, who am I? What do I do? And people would talk about, I don't even know what to wear. I don't know what hairstyles are in because they're just too busy running around in their sweats getting stuff done.
Yes.
And it can be really, really intense. And so there can be so many things that feel foreign, even reaching out to friends who have become distant, or even family members who, again, don't know how to deal with grief. And so they need a space to be able to feel those emotions and process those emotions and still move forward on a pace that works for them.
Absolutely.
And I love that about, helping them, with a resume in terms of how do you explain that? And how do you explain that without getting teary-eyed in front of someone who's interviewing you?
Right.
Or is that okay? There's just so many things that can trigger you after a loss, and you don't know when they're going to hit or how powerful those moments are going to be. Sometimes we can hide them, and sometimes we just crack, and we're raw and we're open. And who understands that? So being understood and heard and accepted for those times, as a whole person, I think is really, really important.
Absolutely. And I will tell you, given the work we do, we understand that, and we've seen that on resumes multiple times where somebody might have a 1 to 5 or longer gap in their resume, and they will put was caring for my father or was caring for my son, whatever it is. And for us, that's a huge benefit, and we want to talk about it because, family caregivers are some of the best caregivers you can find out there. It's one thing to go to school and learn how to be a CNA or be a medical assistant, but the classroom is a whole lot different than the real world, as we all know. And those family caregivers are some of the most dedicated, compassionate people because they can relate to what these people are going through that they're now being hired to take care of. So, but that we're kind of an exception because of our industry. But if you go to like an office building or something else, if they're not aware of family caregiving or the impacts that it has, they may not be as understanding about it. So, trying to help them, like you said, with your program in Roseville, reentry, I think that is something, everybody needs to know about.
Well, and when you're talking about businesses not really understanding, they think they're going to be distracted, and there might be moments, but they're fools if they don't think their other employees don't get distracted at times. Hello,
yes,
that is life. But I think one of the things that they are thoroughly missing out on is it also gives organizations a time to team build. To bring that compassion in, to help one another, because I don't know about you, but that's one of the biggest things that I hear now is that our businesses are so siloed, or they're so task oriented and so intense. It's a ripple effect in terms of mental health and production. And when somebody can be talking at the water cooler or over a chat, about trying to support somebody. Yeah, you're right. That might take a little bit of time. And again, stuff has to be monitored. I respect that. But to know that others on your team understand, respect, and care,
right?
Those people will stay longer and be more committed, knowing that that's allowed, because we have in my opinion, way too many people scared to death that they're going to get axed for whatever reason at an office. And I'm 66, and that was never a thought when I was younger. I mean, people stayed at their jobs. People don't stay at their jobs anymore, and there's a reason for that. They don't feel cared for. They don't feel supported. They don't feel part of the team. And we have created that environment in many, many places where it's just a paycheck and hopefully benefits. And that's not enough. And we're all paying the cost for that in higher prices. And instability within organizations in my mind. So that's cool to hear. Any other particular topics that you heard that kind of stuck out?
I think none other than the ones, mentioned about, the groups they had, a lot of the, like I said, the keynote speakers really, relating to what family caregivers have gone through, either as a recipient or as the provider of care. One of the other ones, though, that I think is really profound that the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is doing, and it's their Hidden Helpers program. And the hidden helpers are really the children who are now in the role of being a caregiver for a parent or a loved one. And when I say children, young adults under 18, and they're trying to equip them and provide them with the resources because, as an adult, it's not easy, but you don't have to go to school, you don't have to get your diploma, that part of your life is behind you. But for the hidden helpers, a lot of them still have that in front of them. So now you add that component of you have to be in class, you have to be able to study, you have to do projects, you have to, graduate, but you're also a full-time caregiver for a family member. That's a tremendous responsibility for a young adult or a child. And so they have this wonderful program where they're helping to equip them and give them the resources. I know I had spoken with the foundation yesterday, and they're getting ready to have like a conference / respite where these hidden helpers are going to be going to Disney World for a day coming up. They're trying to give them a sense of normalcy, but also give them the resources to be able to, embark and travel this caregiving journey.
Well, yeah, I was just talking to somebody the other day on this, and this is, I used to go into schools and kind of talk with kids, both junior high and high school. And I was shocked at how many hidden helpers there were. And I went in talking specifically about dementia, and I mean, shocked, from parents, grandparents, neighbors, aunts, uncles, all kinds of things. And one of the things is, letting them understand whatever situation they're dealing with. A lot of times as adults, and I think this still happens way too often, is we tap them on the shoulder going, can you watch them from this time to this time? Because you're home earlier than I am. But we are not giving them the details of what is really going on, because we're protecting them from that. We're not protecting them. We're causing more stress because they want to help. They want to understand. And my gosh, they are so flippin' creative, and we're shutting the door on that, thinking they're just kids. Yeah. Those kids technology savvy. They aren't, on some levels, they're not feeling the loss that some of the adults, have, because they haven't been with their parent as long as maybe a spouse or, mom or dad or whatever the situation is. And so they look at it differently. I mean, I think of my daughter who only knew her grandma, and again, I'm coming from dementia because that's my world, but who only knew her grandma with dementia. Yeah. So she looked at her very different than my dad did, than I did, than my brothers, than their long-term friends, because there was this history of this other person who was able to do different things. And, my daughter, she just wanted to play. She wanted to engage, and she didn't see the walls or the barriers or the losses. And that's a huge gift.
It's amazing
to be able to give the person you're caring for, because they look at them as normal.
Right.
In a lot of ways. And so when I was talking with this colleague, I said, where I hear the frustration coming in is really from the older kids, especially wanting to get creative, wanting to step in. And of course, it's disappointing when something gets canceled because there's an emergency at home. But, we're not preparing people for that either.
Right. Well,
and so I love the name, the Hidden Helpers, too. I just, it's almost, it just reminds me of little fairies, just really a magical thing, which they are. Yes. Providing some really very magical care. So that's very cool.
Well, and just to add one more thing to the Hidden Helpers, with the way the Dole Foundation is approaching it, is they're getting input from, child psychiatrists and, the normal people, but then they're also taking a lot of input from the children too. Mm-hmm. They want their input, because who knows better than the children who are experiencing it and going through it. So I think later this year, I could be wrong on this, I believe they're releasing their youth caregiving map. And that map has been informed by all of their discussions and input from the children themselves, which I think, who better? If I'm going to make a toy, I want a child to give me input, not somebody that doesn't play with toys anymore. And so I think they're taking a very, very strong position in, letting the children be involved so heavily in the development of these programs.
Gosh, and this is kind of a selfish thing, but I'm going to mention it. I would love to connect with them on Betty the Bald Chicken, because it's all about lessons on how to care. And it's my children's book that, the adults think they're going to teach the kids, but the kids really teach the adults.
Right.
But it opens the door to the conversation of, have you ever felt like this? How do you want to be cared for? What do you do? And it gets the adult and the children, I think, kind of offsets them, and it's not as tense of a conversation,
Right.
just because of the drawings and things to open the door on some of those questions that we're not even asking, and
Right.
so we can't even have discussions on them, but I think are helpful for all ages. But if you think that would be
Yeah.
beneficial, please let me know on that.
Absolutely.
And I also wanted to ask you about, a lot of times when I leave a conference or a big event, there are certain like takeaways that I just have. Were there any kind of gems for you that you walked out with?
The gem really for me was, and I still feel this unequivocally today, is that you can have people that can disagree fiercely and have different ideology on any number of things and bring them all together at one location, and they're 100% united on the common good. And that was my takeaway. Like, I didn't know how or what to expect exactly going there. But you wouldn't know any of these people are politicians. You wouldn't know what party they're affiliated with. You wouldn't know what their beliefs are. All you would know is everybody there were united to support and further the awareness and cause of supporting family caregivers. That to me is my takeaway. And then you see all these fellows that just entered this class of 2025. They're all going to be out in the communities carrying on this work day to day. I feel so inspired and, just like you said earlier, refreshed to know differences can be made and they are being made.
Well, I just got like goosebumps because that's like my perfect zone that just really gets me excited, because I'm a firm believer in that. I mean, I've always been like that all of my life. It's like, it doesn't have to be an argument.
Right.
We can have an adult conversation and expand both our minds by looking at things from a different angle to make something better. And I personally get really frustrated because not everybody thinks like you and I do, on that, or like the Dole Foundation. Because I'm like, it's just so simple. It just is so natural to me. I have a hard time understanding how people don't understand and accept that. But we're all brought up differently, and sometimes in fashions where king of the hill was most important,
Right.
Instead of serving the people.
Right. 100%. I think, I think sometimes people can lose focus on why they got into this space, why they're doing what they do for maybe a personal agenda. And then I think that's where you kind of veer off to a different direction than, the direction of like the Dole Foundation or yourself or us, where, we're just here to try to do whatever we can to support these family caregivers.
Yeah.
That is my personal agenda.
Yeah. And it doesn't, I think so often people get pulled financially in terms of, how much can we make off of this? And they don't want to be fluid because that's work. But I think you always have to be in touch with your audience to make sure that you're serving.
Yeah.
You can have a great mission statement, but if you're not really attuned to who you're serving, it's just words.
Yeah.
And it shows up, and people can understand that. So, and I personally, I love hearing different perspectives. I just, anything that gives me a broader view, and maybe it's something that can be incorporated together, but maybe they have to be two different things that support one another.
Right.
Too, and that's okay. It sounds like it was a wonderful, wonderful time. Did the event itself kind of influence your perspective on things at all relating to, caregivers and veterans as a whole?
I think it influenced it for the better. Not that I had a a bad perspective going into it. But, oftentimes you hear, like you and I've said today and throughout, our time doing conscious caregiving, often too many times people are staying in their own silos. And that, my perspective now is, what? Not everybody does stay in their own silo. They're crossing, over the fence, the aisle, however you want to say it. And, work can get done, and it gives me great hope that it will get done. Last year, the passage of the Dole Act, Congresswoman Brownlee was a driving force behind that. She said she was on board before it was popular to do so, and when you're a politician, you got to save some of your capital for other things. And, she got behind it, one of the first early voices, and, it came to a realization and passage last year. So, I think we're headed in the right direction. It gave me a lot of inspiration and hope that, we're going in the right direction to make change.
Well, and I think too, with all of the cuts for funding, collaboration is going to be key, because none of us can do this alone, and it's gonna force some people to cross that line and shake a hand.
Yeah.
Because if they still really want to do the work, they're just not going to have the funding to be able to maybe do everything they used to do or to expand it. And I think that's really exciting in a lot of ways. As much as I hate losing funding, I think that it also helps people when you don't have a budget, or when you have a smaller budget. It makes you look more critically at how you're spending and how you're using things, and it also allows to tap into personal collateral.
Right.
Those connections, the time invested, the skill sets that a lot of times we're paying for, that we don't necessarily have to if we asked.
Right.
Because you're really getting into tapping the advocacy portion, of the service, and there's millions of dollars and skill sets that people are ready to give.
Right.
And it's not all about money, and a lot of it can take you even further than a dollar bill can.
Right.
Through those connections, and through the authentic belief in the foundation or the organization or whatever it is. That word of mouth is pretty powerful. Were there any challenges that you had, or, unexpected little surprises during the events?
Not so much any unexpected surprises. I think the biggest challenge was just kind of navigating, because like I said, we did have 2 scheduled interviews with their fellows. We were given permission, we brought our mobile equipment. So we had set up all of our camera gear on the press riser that they gave to us to film the entire convening from the stage. And then we tied in our audio to their audio adapters, so we didn't need microphones for that. We were taken directly from their audio. But then our mobile gear, was, okay, where should we go? Who should we talk to? Because there's so many, great people there making such a great difference. And that it sounds silly, but that for me was a challenge. Should we approach this person? We had permission to, but do we approach them? And so we were just trying to be very respectful of, especially the politicians and, like the Medal of Honor recipient. We don't want to come across, pushy or whatever, but I know one of the politicians said, and who are you guys with? And, we had a press badge on. And I said, we're here by invitation of the foundation. We're from All Home Care Matters. And the aide was like, oh, All Home Care Matters. That's good. Yeah. Talk, I just found that kind of comical, because I'm like, does she really know who All Home Care Matters is? Or, that is a good name. That's a good name. So that for me was really just kind of challenging, because I'm trying to be always respectful of people, and I don't want to, impose or, bother them if they don't want to be bothered. But every single person was absolutely gracious. There was actually a 102-year-old World War II veteran there that was probably one of the biggest celebrities at the event. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, and here he's attending, 102 years old. I mean, that is just remarkable to me and so inspirational, and so I can't say enough positive things. I really don't have anything that I would say I didn't like or didn't care for or I wish was done differently. It was perfect from start to finish.
Yeah, that doing the interviews and trying to corral people can be tough. I know I used to work the PGA, the senior PGA when I came to Minnesota, and somehow I lucked out being in the press room. And that was always really nice because they all were directed into the press room, and then everyone knew it was okay. This was their time, versus trying to track people down can be really difficult because you don't know what their schedules are. And sometimes people don't stay for the whole thing. They're just in, they're out, and those things. So, that would be maybe a recommendation if that's something that they could do, to even just sleight of hand saying, if you've got the time, go here, or contact this person to be able to. But again, I don't know how many press people they had there too, because you can't really throw it all back on them.
Well, I know the foundation was doing some filming. I don't know what the correct term is, but there was a full professional camera crew there, and every VA hospital, clinic, doctor's office in the country was live streaming the event right in their waiting rooms and hospital rooms, which was really amazing. But aside from us, there was one other quote unquote podcaster there, and he had a military podcast. Wonderful man. The name of it is Oscar Mike, and he was just phenomenal. But we were doing more like interviews and coverage, where I think he was doing more just filming of the actual speeches and things. But he did interview two of the fellows as well. But then we were, mobile kind of, with the microphones and camera crew following and, just talking to people. And great event. I'm really encouraging viewers and listeners, tell Lori she needs to go next year. It would be great. We could, tag team and do something while we're there together. But I definitely would highly recommend it to any family caregiver, any serviceman or woman, or just family caregiver. There is, unlimited resources for these families, and they're always trying to improve on, the next thing.
Okay. Well, and maybe we can get that date for next year if they have that, so we can maybe plug that into the video and our writings about this. And my understanding was there's not a fee, so that kind of takes that limit away from people too, because so often can be a substantial fee sometimes to go to different conferences and things that are out there. So that's nice.
Free to attend.
And you said meals were included?
They had a wonderful lunch, very wonderful lunch, and then they also had the post-convening gala, and they had food and beverages at that as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good to know. Are there any topics you'd like to see them cover? And maybe they even did cover them and you just weren't aware of them because you had so many things going on.
I think one for me, and it might have been there, and I'm not aware of it, because I think they really zeroed in on those 4 strong pillars. But, respite, resources for respite, because, there are so many times where family caregivers, they need a doctor's appointment. They need to go to, get their hair or nails done, or they need to go grocery shop, whatever it is. And their loved one may not necessarily be able to go out of the house anymore, or it might be too challenging or not even safe for them to do so. Ideas, suggestions, resources to make that possible.
Well, and maybe they can come up with a great term like hidden helpers, because people don't even know what respite is, and really you want to define that for people, because until you need it, you don't even know, you don't hear the word.
Typically speaking, respite is like It could be a day for a few hours. It could be a few days. It could be a couple of weeks. Usually more than that, though, then you would be looking into like full-time care, like a home care company or placement. And it's just to give that caregiver that time they need to take care of personal responsibilities. Sometimes it's even to go on a short vacation even, or maybe their child's graduating in college. They live in a different state and they need to go for a few days to be at graduation. They need that respite so that they can do so. I know when you're in hospice, you get respite services automatically. I should say with most hospices, they offer respite. And that usually is not at your home, though, or where your loved one's living at. It's usually at a wing of a hospital or a facility somewhere that's been designated as a respite room where a loved one could go for a weekend. Sometimes they even offer a week. Usually there's a very long waiting list. So if that is something you want to take advantage of, the sooner you get on the list, the better it is. But non-hospice, I don't know of any respite services that are offered anywhere.
Yeah, well, and I think too, we always look at respite as serving the caregiver, but I also want to remind people that respite can be wonderful for the individual that you're caring for. Some places call it adult day or social care, or a club. Those types of things are all considered respite too. And getting people to feel socially connected, even if they go in fist flying at first, I don't want to go, a lot of times we don't know what we miss until it re-enters our life again. And
Right.
so if people have been isolated, they've gotten used to that and they've adjusted, but all of a sudden, they're around people and they get a little break too. I mean, I always have a joke with it. I was kind of with my folks 24/7. And my brothers and I had a conversation about, well, I really wouldn't let them in. And I'm like, no, I would let you in. And they're like, but you wanted it your way. And I'm like, I had to look inward and go, yeah, I did. Because I knew I was doing a good job and you were telling me I was doing a good job. And I wanted them to be comfortable.
Right.
But then, we kind of joked about, nobody wants to be tied to me 24/7. Nobody wants to be tied to anybody 24/7. We want our independence. It's nice to know that they're there and that they care. But people need to have freedom on both sides of the aisle to recoup and hear somebody else's voice, or be able to, tell a story and get that initial reaction, that maybe they don't get from that person because they're too busy,
Right.
and stuff. So, respite, I think, can be healthy for both. There's a lot of guilt. A lot of times it's wrapped into that. I don't really know how we got there with that, but that just seems to be a package deal that caregivers feel very guilty to take any time for themselves. But that gets back into the self-care and staying healthy, and for them not losing their connection. So if your person passes, and we're all going to pass at some point, you still have some connections that you can grab out to and kind of keep your normal. So there's a lot of good reasons why respite is helpful. And I don't know the statistic offhand, I should, but there's a saying that a lot of caregivers will get ill or pass themselves prior to the person they're caring for when they're not maintaining a good healthy level of balance for themselves, and respite allows for that.
Very
it
true.
assists with that.
Very true. I'm always fond of saying, A, you're not alone, because a lot of times caregivers feel like they're the only one sometimes, especially in their social circle. But B, you have to take care of yourself so you can continue taking care of your loved one. And respite's a part of taking care of yourself.
Yeah. And no matter who you're caring for, what your situation is, I think sometimes we are pushed into, we have to be with a similar group, and there might not be a similar group to your situation. But caregiving, there's so many things that overlap. I don't care if it's a small child or an elderly person or a teenager, if it's a spouse or a friend or, whoever it is, there are still just basic things to caring for another and caring for ourselves that go the gamut, in my opinion.
Your opinion, I agree with full-heartedly, Lori, as I usually do.
Well, you better. No,
I do.
no,
Okay.
no. And that's what I love about working with you is we can be really open in
Yes.
terms of what our thoughts are and add our perspectives in. And, to me, I love doing this interview because I learned a lot about something that I didn't know about, many things that I didn't know about. And that's always wonderful. And I trust, I trust you in terms of what you say. I know this isn't a sales pitch. This is coming from your heart in terms of what you saw, what you received out of this. And a lot of times people, I think after they go to an event or gathering, they don't really kind of look back at what did I get out of this? It's just something that is past, but I can tell from you, this isn't a passing moment. You've made some great connections. You've learned a lot. And it's like a building block.
Yes. Well, and I would just add here, I cannot say enough about the hospitality, the graciousness, and the warmth which we were received with and had, shown to us from the entire start of the event to the very end, where, they're very busy. I mean, they're hosting senators, politicians, you name it. But they always wanted to ensure, did we need anything? Are you comfortable? Everything okay? I mean, that to me, just the, hospitality was just phenomenal. Oftentimes when you're invited to something or you're at something, the initial, like, how are you? Let me know if you need anything. And then you might not see anybody till the end, I mean, it was incredible. We arrived in D.C. on Sunday, and we spent Sunday and Monday doing family stuff, and plus a camera guy, and I had a wonderful phone call Monday with them, and they're asking, how do we want to be set up? Do we want this? Do we want? I mean, it was just it just was incredible. I don't know how else to really put it other than, they really put in practice what they're preaching. They really do care about family caregivers. They care about our veterans, our military families, and, family caregivers in general. At the bottom of their brochure that they handed out, or their program for the event, and I was sharing this with you earlier before we started, it says mapping the future of caregiving in a changing world. And that's exactly what they're doing, and they're not stopping. They want to keep improving this so that there's, like, to use a military term, no caregiver left behind, and it's just incredible to have been a part of something so significant that's making such a profound impact in our country.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I appreciate you sharing all of this great information, and I've learned so much about the Dole Foundation that has been wonderful. And I'll look to see what that date is and
Yes.
see if maybe that'll work for me next year
All
to
right.
come out. It sounds fascinating. So thanks, Lance, for taking the time with us.
Always
to
my pleasure,
share this.
Lori. Always my pleasure. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining us again here at Conscious Caregiving with L&L, where we're tackling the tough conversations. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.